What if losing everything, your job, your stability, even your sense of worth, was actually the moment your marriage had been quietly waiting for? In this slow, real English story, I'll take you inside a life in Detroit where silence grew louder than love until simple words, honest pain, and small daily efforts began to rebuild something stronger than before. When everything fell apart, what if the moment you feel most like giving up is actually the moment your life is quietly asking you to stay? You don't usually notice the exact second your life starts to crack. It doesn't come with dramatic music or a warning sign. For me, it happened on a gray morning in Detroit, the kind of morning where the sky looks like it forgot how to be blue. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at an email that was only 3 sentences long, but somehow heavy enough to change everything.
I'm sorry.
Due to restructuring, your position has been eliminated. That was it. No long explanation.
No emotional goodbye.
Just a polite sentence that quietly erased my routine, my income, and a big part of my identity. And if you've ever been there, you already know it's not just about losing a job. It feels like losing direction. Like someone pressed pause on your life, but forgot to tell you how to press play again. Now here's the strange part. When something like this happens, your brain doesn't go into solution mode right away. No, your brain goes into something much more dramatic. Psychologists call it a threat response. Your mind starts scanning for danger, even if the danger is just your own thoughts. Your heart beats a little faster. Your chest feels tight. And suddenly, every small problem in your life becomes part of one giant, overwhelming story. In my case, that story sounded like this. If I lost my job, what else am I about to lose? And just like that, my marriage entered the conversation. You see, before that day, my relationship felt stable. Not perfect, not like those romantic movies, but steady, comfortable, predictable. We had routines. We had small jokes. We had those quiet evenings where nothing exciting happened, but nothing was wrong either. And honestly, I used to think that was enough. But here's something most people don't realize. Stability is easy when life is easy. The real test doesn't come when everything is working. It comes when something breaks. That night, I sat at the dinner table with my wife, and something felt different.
The food tasted the same.
The chairs were the same. She was the same person. But the air between us had changed. It felt heavier, like we were both carrying invisible questions we didn't know how to ask. I wanted to say something. Anything. But my brain was busy doing that annoying thing it does, overthinking every possible sentence before it even leaves your mouth. So instead of speaking, I stayed quiet. And silence, by the way, is never neutral. It doesn't just sit there politely. It grows. It stretches. It fills the space where connection used to live. If you've ever tried to learn English, you might recognize this feeling. That moment when you know a few words, maybe even enough to express yourself, but you hesitate. You wait. You tell yourself, maybe later. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to speak at all. That's exactly what was happening in my marriage. Not because we didn't care, but because we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing. Here's where things get interesting, though. There's a concept in psychology called cognitive load. It basically means your brain only has so much energy at one time. When you're stressed about money, work, or your future, your brain uses most of that energy just trying to cope, which means you have less energy left for communication, patience, and emotional connection. In simple terms, when life gets hard, talking gets harder. And that's exactly why so many people start to feel distant from the people they love right when they need them the most. That night, I finally said something. Not perfect English. Not even a perfect sentence. Just something simple. I feel scared. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't poetic. But it was real. And something unexpected happened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fix the problem. She didn't give a long speech. She just looked at me and said, slowly, "Me too." That was it. 2 small sentences. But somehow, they felt bigger than all the silence we had been carrying. You see, when you're overwhelmed, your brain doesn't need complex language. It doesn't need perfect grammar. It needs clarity. It needs honesty. And most importantly, it needs connection. This is why learning English through real-life stories, through simple, emotional moments, actually works. Because your brain remembers meaning, not just vocabulary. When you connect words to feelings, they stick. They become part of you. That night, we didn't solve our problems. The bills were still there. The job was still gone. The future was still uncertain. But something shifted. We stopped pretending everything was fine. And strangely enough, that was the first step to actually becoming okay again. Now, if you're watching this and thinking about giving up on learning English, on your goals, maybe even on a relationship, I want you to notice something. Your brain might be telling you that stopping is the safest option. But sometimes, that's just your mind trying to protect you from discomfort, not guide you toward growth. Because here's the truth most people don't say out loud. The moment everything falls apart is often the moment something more honest begins. And in my case, that something started with 3 simple words. I feel scared. Not confident. Not strong. Just honest. And oddly enough, honesty turned out to be stronger than confidence. So if you take one thing from this part of the story, let it be this. You don't need perfect English to reconnect. You don't need perfect conditions to start again. You just need one small, real sentence said at the right moment. Because sometimes your life isn't falling apart. It's just removing everything that was keeping you from speaking the truth. And trust me, your truth, even in simple English, is more powerful than your silence. A cold city, a warm love. Have you ever noticed how a place can feel colder than it actually is, not because of the weather, but because of what you're going through inside? That's how Detroit felt to me in those early days. Not just cold in temperature, though trust me, winter there doesn't play around, but cold in a way that quietly tests your spirit. The wind cuts through your jacket like it has something personal against you. The streets feel wide and empty, especially in the early morning. And if you're new, everything from the accent to the small talk feels just slightly out of reach. But here's the twist. That same city was also where I found love. Before everything fell apart, before the job loss, before the silence at the dinner table, there was a version of life that felt simple in the best way. I had a routine. I had a job that paid the bills. And I had someone who made even the coldest days feel manageable. We met in the most ordinary way possible. Not a movie scene. No dramatic music. Just a small conversation at a local grocery store. I remember struggling to understand what the cashier was saying. My brain was doing that thing again, translating, guessing, overthinking, all at the same time. And then she laughed. Not at me, but with me. You're not from here, right? She asked slowly, clearly. I nodded, a little embarrassed. It's okay, she said. You're doing better than you think. Now, here's something fascinating about the human brain. There's a concept called the affective filter in language learning. It basically means that when you feel anxious, nervous, or judged, your ability to understand and speak a new language drops significantly. But when you feel safe, when you feel accepted, your brain opens up. You learn faster. You speak more freely. In that moment, without knowing it, she lowered my affective filter. And suddenly, English didn't feel like a test anymore. It felt like a bridge. We started talking more. Simple conversations at first. Short sentences. Slow words. Where are you from? How long have you been here? Do you like Detroit? Nothing complicated. But each conversation felt like progress, not just in language, but in connection. You see, when you're learning English through real life, you're not just memorizing words. You're attaching meaning to them, emotion, memory, context. That's why you might forget a vocabulary list in a day, but remember a simple sentence someone said to you years ago, because it meant something. Our relationship grew the same way. Slowly. Naturally. Without pressure. We didn't need big plans or perfect communication. We just needed consistency. A few honest words every day. A willingness to try, even when it felt awkward. And that's something a lot of people misunderstand, both in relationships and in learning English. They think you need to be impressive. But what you really need is to be present. I remember one winter evening, the snow falling so quietly it felt like the whole city had decided to whisper. We were walking together, hands in our pockets, talking about nothing important. I like this, she said. This? I asked. Yeah. Simple. Calm. Real. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But looking back, I realized something. That moment wasn't just about the weather or the walk. It was about how safe we felt with each other. And safety, emotional safety, is one of the strongest foundations for both love and learning. When you feel safe, you try more. You speak more. You risk making mistakes. And mistakes, by the way, are not the problem. Avoiding them is. That's why in those early days, my English improved without me even noticing. Not because I was studying harder, but because I was using it in a real, meaningful context. I wasn't trying to sound perfect. I was trying to be understood. And somehow, that made all the difference. We built our life in small pieces. Shared meals. Late-night conversations. Weekend routines. Nothing flashy. Nothing dramatic. But strong. Or, at least it felt strong. Because here's the part no one likes to talk about. Sometimes, what feels strong hasn't been tested yet. It's easy to feel connected when life is stable. When the bills are paid. When your routine is predictable. When your biggest problem is deciding what to eat for dinner. But real strength, whether in a relationship or in your ability to communicate, only shows up when something disrupts that comfort. And we hadn't faced that yet. Not really. Looking back, I can see the signs. Small things. Moments where we avoided difficult conversations. Times when we chose comfort over honesty. It didn't seem like a big deal then. But those small habits, they add up. Kind of like learning English. If you practice a little every day, even just a few minutes, your progress compounds. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, until one day, you realize you can understand more, speak more, connect more. But the opposite is also true. If you avoid speaking, avoid discomfort, avoid effort, that also compounds. And eventually you find yourself stuck. We didn't realize it at the time, but we were building both strength and weakness at the same time. Strong in love, weak in communication under pressure. And then life did what life always does. It tested us. But before that moment came, before the job loss, before the silence, before the doubt, we had something real. Something warm in a cold city. And maybe that's why it hurts so much when things started to change. Because it's one thing to lose something you never had. It's another thing entirely to feel something good slipping through your hands. So if you're watching this and thinking about your own life, your own relationship, your own English learning journey, ask yourself something simple. Are you building something that only works when life is easy? Or are you building something that can survive when life gets hard? Because the difference between those two is everything. And trust me, you don't really know which one you have until the cold finally arrives. The day I lost my job. Have you ever had a normal day that suddenly splits your life into before and after without asking for permission? That was the day I lost my job in Detroit. And the strange thing is, it didn't feel dramatic at first.
No loud arguments.
No big scene. Just a quiet meeting room, a polite manager, and a sentence that sounded like it had been practiced too many times. We appreciate your work, but due to restructuring, we have to let you go. If you listen closely, you'll notice something about sentences like that. They're designed to sound soft,
Careful.
professional, but your brain doesn't hear the softness. It only hears the meaning. You're no longer needed. And in that moment, something shifts inside you. Not loudly, not instantly,
But deeply.
At first, I nodded. I even said, I understand. Because that's what people do, right? We try to stay calm. We try to act like we're in control, even when we're not. But here's what was actually happening inside my brain. There's a psychological response called loss of identity shock. When you lose a job, your brain doesn't just process it as a financial problem. It processes it as a threat to who you are. Your routine disappears. Your role disappears. Even your sense of purpose feels blurry. And when that happens, your brain starts asking dangerous questions. What am I now? What if I can't fix this? What if this is just the beginning? Those questions don't come with answers. They just echo. I walked out of that building into the cold air of Detroit, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't know where to go next. Normally, I would drive home with a clear plan, finish work, have dinner, talk about the day. But that day, I sat in my car longer than usual. Not because I didn't know how to drive home, but because I didn't know how to explain what just happened. You see, losing a job isn't just about the event itself. It's about the story you start telling yourself after. And my story was getting darker by the minute. I should have worked harder. I should have seen this coming. I'm going to disappoint her. Notice how quickly the brain turns a situation into self-blame. That's not an accident. It's actually a cognitive bias. Your brain tries to create a sense of control by blaming you. Because if it's your fault, then maybe you can fix it. But here's the problem. Not everything is your fault. And not everything is under your control. Still knowing that doesn't stop the feeling. When I finally got home, everything looked the same.
The door.
The kitchen. The familiar quiet. But it didn't feel the same anymore. It felt like I was walking into a space where I had to deliver bad news without knowing how it would be received. She was there, sitting at the table. "Hey," she said, smiling slightly. "You're early." That one sentence hit harder than the meeting, because now it was real. I sat down, took a breath, and tried to organize my thoughts. But here's something no one tells you about stress. Your ability to form clear sentences drops. Your brain is overloaded, your emotions are high, and suddenly even simple communication feels difficult. This is exactly what happens when you try to speak English under pressure. You know the words. You've learned the grammar. But when the moment comes, your mind goes blank. Not because you don't know, but because your brain is overwhelmed. That's what I was feeling. I wanted to explain everything perfectly, but all I managed to say was, "I lost my job."
Simple. Direct.
Incomplete. And then silence. She looked at me, not shocked, but concerned. What happened? Another simple question. But it felt heavy. I tried to explain.
Slowly.
Not perfect English. Not perfect structure. Just honest words. They said company change. No more position. I didn't expect it. Now here's something interesting. Even though my sentences weren't perfect, she understood everything. Because communication is not about perfection. It's about clarity and emotion. And in that moment, my emotion was clear.
Fear.
Uncertainty. A quiet kind of panic. She didn't respond immediately. And that pause, it felt longer than it actually was. Because when you're anxious, your perception of time changes. Seconds feel like minutes. Silence feels like judgment. But then she said something simple. "We'll figure it out." Not "you'll figure it out."
We.
That word matters more than you think. Because in difficult moments, language shapes reality. One word can either isolate you or remind you that you're not alone. And for a brief moment, I felt something shift. Relief. But it didn't last long. Because after the conversation ends, reality begins. The bills don't disappear. The uncertainty doesn't fade overnight. And your brain, your brain keeps working overtime. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment, the meeting, the words, my reactions, over and over again. This is something psychologists call rumination. It's when your brain loops the same thoughts, trying to solve a problem that doesn't have an immediate solution. And here's the ironic part. The more you think, the worse you feel. But the worse you feel, the more you think. It's a loop. And if you're not careful, that loop starts affecting everything: your mood, your energy, your relationships, even your motivation to learn something as simple as English. Because when your mind is full of stress, it has no space left for growth. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. Nothing had changed. But everything felt different. I didn't have to go to work. I didn't have a schedule. I didn't even have a clear plan. And for a moment, that freedom felt uncomfortable. Because structure gives us a sense of control. And without it, we feel lost. That's when I realized something important. Losing my job wasn't just going to test my career. It was going to test my mindset, my discipline, and most importantly, my marriage. Because it's one thing to go through stress alone. It's another thing to go through it with someone else where every emotion, every reaction, every silence is shared. And sometimes shared stress doesn't bring people closer.
Sometimes it pushes them apart.
So if you're watching this right now, maybe feeling stuck, maybe feeling like you've lost direction, whether it's in your career, your relationship, or even your English learning journey, pause for a second.
Take a breath.
And remember this. You don't need to have everything figured out today. You just need to face the moment honestly. Because the day everything falls apart is also the day you find out what you're really made of. And trust me, that discovery is just beginning. Silence at the dinner table. Have you ever sat across from someone you love and felt like you were miles apart, even though you were only a few inches away? That's what our dinner started to feel like after I lost my job in Detroit. Nothing dramatic happened at first.
No arguments. No shouting.
Just something quieter and honestly more dangerous. Silence. At the beginning, it didn't seem like a problem. In fact, it almost felt polite. We were both giving each other space. That's what people say, right? It sounds mature, respectful, even healthy. But here's the truth most people don't realize. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's avoidance in disguise. Our dinners used to be simple but alive. Small conversations about the day, random jokes, comments about the weather, work, or something funny we saw online. Nothing special, but real. After the job loss, those conversations started to shrink. How was your day? Okay. What did you do? Not much. Short answers. Safe answers. Empty answers. And the strange part is, both of us noticed it, but neither of us knew how to fix it. Because once silence becomes a habit, breaking it feels uncomfortable, almost unnatural. This is actually something backed by psychology. There's a concept called emotional withdrawal. When people feel stressed, overwhelmed, or uncertain, they often reduce communication, not because they don't care, but because they don't have the energy to engage. Your brain is trying to protect you, but in doing so, it slowly disconnects you from others. And that's exactly what was happening to us. Every dinner became a quiet performance. We sat down, ate our food, exchanged a few basic sentences, and then escaped back to our phones, our thoughts, our separate worlds. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. This kind of silence feels very similar to what happens when you stop practicing English. At first you think, it's okay, I'll start again later. But later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. And before you know it, speaking feels harder than it used to. Not because you forgot everything, but because you lost the habit of expressing yourself. That's what we were losing. The habit of talking. The habit of sharing. The habit of being open. One night, I remember sitting there, staring at my plate, trying to think of something to say. Not something deep. Not something emotional. Just something. But my brain did that thing again, overthinking. Don't say the wrong thing. Don't make it worse. Maybe it's better to stay quiet. And just like that, another opportunity passed. You see, your brain hates uncertainty. And when you're already stressed about money, about the future, it tries to minimize risk. And talking suddenly feels like a risk. Because what if it leads to an argument? What if it reveals how scared you really are? What if it makes things more real? So instead, you choose silence. But here's the irony. Silence doesn't remove problems. It just delays them, and often it makes them bigger. I started noticing small changes in her too. The way she spoke less. The way she avoided eye contact sometimes. The way her tone became more neutral, like she was trying not to add more weight to an already heavy situation. And that hurt. Not because she was doing anything wrong, but because it felt like we were slowly becoming strangers in our own home. Now, if you've ever felt this in your own relationship, or even in your own learning journey, you'll understand this next part. Distance doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, quiet moments, missed conversations, unasked questions, unspoken feelings. And over time, those small gaps turn into something bigger. A disconnect. That's why communication, simple, imperfect communication, is so important. Not because it solves everything immediately, but because it keeps the connection alive. There's actually research showing that couples who maintain even small daily conversations, just a few minutes of honest sharing, are significantly more resilient during stressful periods. Not because their problems are smaller, but because their connection is stronger. Looking back, we weren't doing that anymore. We were surviving but not connecting. And there's a big difference. One evening, something shifted slightly. It wasn't a big moment. No dramatic speech.
No sudden breakthrough. Just a small decision.
Instead of staying quiet, I said something simple. This feels different lately. Not perfect grammar. Not a long explanation. Just an observation. She looked up. What do you mean? I hesitated. For a second, I almost went back to silence. But then I continued. We don't talk like before. Again, simple words, but real. And something changed in the air. Because when you name a problem, it becomes visible. And when something is visible, you can finally face it. She didn't get defensive. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly. Yeah, I feel it too. That moment wasn't a solution, but it was a crack in the silence. And sometimes that's all you need to start. This is exactly how progress works in language learning too. You don't suddenly become fluent overnight. You start with one sentence, one honest attempt, one moment where you choose to speak instead of staying silent. And that small action creates momentum. So if you're watching this and recognizing something familiar, maybe in your relationship, maybe in your own struggle to speak English, I want you to remember this. You don't need a perfect conversation. You just need to break the silence. Because silence feels safe, but it slowly builds distance. And distance, if left unchecked, can turn even the strongest connection into something fragile. That night, we didn't fix everything. But for the first time in a while, we actually started talking again. And sometimes, that's the difference between falling apart and finding your way back. Why we stop trying. Have you ever noticed how quitting doesn't usually feel like a big decision? It feels like a quiet relief? Not dramatic. Not loud. Just a small voice in your head saying, maybe I'll try again later. And somehow that later keeps moving further away. That's exactly what started happening to me. Not just in my job search, not just in my marriage, but even in something as simple as practicing English in Detroit. At first, I told myself I was just taking a break. That sounds responsible, right? Like you're managing your energy. But if you look closer, there's something deeper going on. Your brain is tired. And when your brain is tired, it doesn't want growth. It wants comfort. There's actually a psychological concept called ego depletion. It suggests that your mental energy is limited. Every decision, every stress, every emotional moment uses a bit of that energy. And when it runs low, your brain starts cutting corners. It avoids effort. It avoids discomfort. It avoids trying. That's why after I lost my job, everything that required effort suddenly felt heavier. Sending applications, starting conversations, even forming sentences in English, something I used to practice daily, started to feel like too much. Not impossible, just exhausting. And here's the dangerous part. When you stop trying, even for a short time, your brain quickly adapts to that new normal. It starts telling you stories like, you need more time. You're not ready yet. You'll do it when you feel better. But what it's really doing is protecting you from discomfort, because trying means risking failure. Trying means facing uncertainty. Trying means admitting that you don't have control. And your brain hates that. So instead, it offers you something easier. Avoidance. Now, let's connect this to something you might be experiencing right now. Learning English. Have you ever skipped practice for a day, then two, then a week? At first, it feels harmless. But then something strange happens. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to start again. Not because you forgot everything, but because your confidence dropped. And confidence, by the way, is not built from thinking. It's built from doing. That's what I was losing. Not my ability to speak, but my habit of speaking. And the same thing was happening in my marriage. We weren't arguing. We weren't fighting. But we also weren't trying as much. Not trying to communicate deeply. Not trying to understand each other's fears. Not trying to fix the growing distance. We were just existing, side by side, but not truly together. Now here's something that might surprise you. Humans are wired to conserve energy. From an evolutionary perspective, your brain is designed to keep you safe, not to help you grow. Growth requires effort. Effort requires energy. And energy, historically, was something we had to protect. So when modern problems show up, like losing a job or struggling in a relationship, your brain reacts the same way it would thousands of years ago. It tries to minimize effort, even if that effort is exactly what you need. That's why quitting often feels good in the moment. It reduces pressure. It removes the immediate challenge. But long-term, it creates something worse. Regret. I remember one afternoon, sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, doing absolutely nothing important. And there was this quiet thought in the back of my mind. You should be doing something. Looking for jobs. Practicing English. Talking to her. Fixing something. Anything. But instead, I stayed there. Because doing nothing felt easier than facing the possibility of failure. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just tired. I was avoiding. There's a big difference. Rest is intentional. Avoidance is emotional. Rest helps you recover, so you can try again. Avoidance keeps you stuck. And I had been stuck longer than I wanted to admit. That realization wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. Because you can't change what you refuse to see. So I started small. Not a big plan. Not a dramatic comeback. Just one simple action. I picked up my phone and instead of scrolling, I opened a short English video. Nothing complicated. Just slow, clear speech. At first, my brain resisted. This is boring. This is too easy. This won't help. But I kept listening. And something interesting happened. After a few minutes, the resistance faded. My brain adjusted. And suddenly, it didn't feel so hard anymore. This is actually supported by neuroscience. There's a principle called activation energy. It means the hardest part of any task is starting it. Once you begin, your brain shifts into a different mode, one that's more focused, more engaged. In simple terms, starting is harder than continuing. That's why the smallest actions matter so much. One sentence, one conversation, one attempt, because they break the pattern of avoidance. That evening, I tried something similar at home. Instead of waiting for the right moment to talk, I just said something simple. Today was difficult, not detailed, not perfect, just honest. And again, something shifted. Because effort, even small effort, creates movement. And movement creates change. So if you're watching this and feeling stuck, whether it's in your English learning journey, your relationship, or your personal life, I want you to understand something important. You're not lazy. You're not incapable. You're just protecting yourself. But sometimes that protection becomes a trap. Because the longer you stay there, the harder it becomes to move. So don't focus on fixing everything. Don't wait for motivation.
Just do one small thing.
Say one sentence.
Take one step.
Because the truth is, we don't stop trying because things are hard. We stop trying because we've convinced ourselves that trying won't change anything. And that belief, that's the real problem. But the moment you challenge it even a little, you're already moving forward. Small words, small healing. Have you ever noticed how the smallest words can carry the heaviest emotions? Not big speeches. Not perfect grammar. Just simple, honest sentences spoken at the right moment. That's where our healing began. Not with a dramatic conversation. Not with a sudden breakthrough. But with small words, spoken slowly, in our quiet home in Detroit. And here's the surprising part. Those small words didn't just help our marriage. They helped me rebuild my confidence in English too. At that point, everything still felt uncertain.
I didn't have a job.
The future was unclear. And emotionally, we were still fragile. But something had changed after we broke the silence. We were trying again. Not perfectly, but intentionally. One evening, instead of letting dinner pass in silence, I decided to do something different. I didn't plan a deep conversation. I didn't prepare anything complicated. I just said one sentence. Today, I felt a little better. That's it. Simple, slow,
Real.
and something interesting happened. She smiled. Not a big reaction. Not dramatic, but genuine. That's good, she said. What made it better? Now, if you've ever struggled with speaking English, you'll recognize this moment. That small question, what made it better, can feel like pressure. Your brain starts searching for the right words, the correct structure. But this time, I didn't overthink. I just answered. I went outside, walked a little, listened to something in English. Again, not perfect, but clear. And that clarity created connection. You see, communication isn't about complexity. It's about presence. There's a concept in psychology called emotional attunement. It means being aware of each other's feelings and responding in a way that shows understanding. And the interesting thing is, you don't need advanced language to do that. You just need to be real. That's why simple English can be so powerful, because it removes the pressure of perfection and replaces it with honesty. From that day on, we started building a new habit. Small conversations. Every day. Not long. Not deep every time. Just consistent. How do you feel today? What did you do? Was it a good day or a hard day? These questions might sound basic, but they create something important. A bridge. And bridges are built one piece at a time. Now, here's something fascinating about the brain. When you repeat small, meaningful actions consistently, you create what's called neural pathways. These are connections in your brain that become stronger with use. The more you practice something, like speaking English or expressing emotions, the easier it becomes. In other words, what feels hard today becomes natural tomorrow, but only if you keep going. That's what we were doing. Not solving everything, but practicing connection. And slowly something started to change. The tension became lighter. The silence became shorter. The distance became smaller. I remember one night we were sitting together after dinner, not talking much, but it didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. It felt calm, safe. And then she said something that stayed with me. I like this version of us. I looked at her, a little surprised. This version? Yeah, she said. We talk more. Even if it's simple. It feels real. That word again. Real. Not perfect. Not impressive. Just real. And that's when I realized something important. Before all of this, the job, the stress, the silence, we thought communication had to be smooth, effortless, almost automatic. But now we were learning something different. Good communication is not automatic. It's intentional. It's built. And sometimes it's rebuilt. The same is true for learning English. You don't wake up one day suddenly fluent. You build it, word by word, sentence by sentence, mistake by mistake. And if you stop, you lose that momentum. But if you continue, even slowly, you gain confidence. That's what was happening to me. My English didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became usable. And that changed everything. Because when you can express yourself, even in simple ways, you feel less trapped inside your own thoughts. You feel more connected, more capable, more alive. There's also a scientific reason for this. When you express emotions through language, your brain activates the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning and emotional regulation. This helps reduce the intensity of stress and anxiety. In simple terms, talking helps you feel better, even if the problem doesn't go away immediately. That's why those small conversations mattered so much. They didn't fix our situation overnight, but they helped us handle it together. And that, together, made all the difference. One evening, I said something I hadn't said before. I'm still scared sometimes. She nodded. Me too, she replied. No solution. No advice. Just shared truth. And strangely, that made the fear feel smaller. Because fear grows in isolation, but it shrinks in connection. So if you're watching this and thinking about your own situation, maybe you're struggling with English, maybe with a relationship, maybe with something deeper, I want you to remember this. You don't need big changes to start healing. You need small, consistent actions. One sentence. One honest moment. One attempt to connect. Because healing doesn't come from perfection. It comes from repetition, from showing up, even when it's uncomfortable, from speaking even when your words are simple, because sometimes the smallest words are the ones that bring people back together. And in our case, those small words were slowly rebuilding something we thought we were losing. Not all at once, but one sentence at a time. Learning in the middle of pain. Have you ever tried to improve your life while your life was quietly falling apart at the same time? It sounds like a bad joke, right? Like trying to learn how to swim while you're already struggling to stay above water. And yet, that's exactly where I found myself in Detroit. No job, uncertain future, a marriage still healing. And somehow, I was trying to learn English more seriously than ever before. Not because I felt motivated, but because I felt desperate to regain control. You see, when everything feels unstable, your brain starts searching for something, anything, that feels structured, predictable, progress-driven. And learning, especially language learning, can become that anchor. But here's the twist. Learning in the middle of pain doesn't look like those perfect study routines you see online. There's no clean desk, no perfect schedule, no study for 2 hours every morning energy. It's messy. It's inconsistent. It's emotional. Some days I couldn't focus at all. I would play an English audio, and my mind would drift after 10 seconds. What am I doing? What if I never find another job? What if things don't get better? Those thoughts would interrupt everything. And if you've ever tried to study while stressed, you know exactly how this feels. Your body is present, but your mind is somewhere else. This isn't a lack of discipline. It's biology. When you're under stress, your brain activates the amygdala, the part responsible for detecting threats. At the same time, it reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for focus, learning, and decision-making. In simple terms, stress makes learning harder. So, if you've ever felt like you can't focus when life gets difficult, you're not broken. Your brain is just trying to protect you. But here's where things started to shift for me. Instead of fighting that reality, I adapted to it. I stopped trying to study like everything was normal, and I started learning in a way that matched my emotional state. Shorter sessions, slower content, more repetition, less pressure. Instead of forcing myself to understand everything, I focused on understanding something. One sentence, one idea, one feeling. I remember listening to a simple English story one afternoon. The speaker was talking slowly, clearly, almost like they knew someone like me was listening. I feel tired, but I keep going. That sentence hit differently. Not because of the vocabulary, but because of the meaning. And that's when I realized something important. Learning English is not just about language. It's about connection. When you connect emotionally with what you hear, your brain pays attention. It remembers. It engages. This is called emotional encoding. Your brain stores information more effectively when it's tied to feelings. That's why you might forget grammar rules, but remember a simple sentence that matched how you felt. So, I changed my approach. I started using real-life emotions as my learning material. If I felt stressed, I would listen to content about stress. If I felt hopeful, I would listen to stories about growth. If I felt confused, I would repeat simple sentences until they felt natural. And slowly, something unexpected happened. English stopped feeling like a subject and started feeling like a tool to understand, a tool to express, a tool to process what I was going through. At the same time, something else was changing at home. Our conversations were becoming more frequent, still simple, still slow, but more natural. One evening, I told her, "I listened to a story today. It helped me." She looked curious. "What was it about?" I paused, searching for words. "About not giving up, even when things are hard." She smiled slightly. "That sounds like us." And just like that, English became part of our connection. Not something separate, not something stressful, but something shared. We started using simple English sentences more often in our daily conversations.
Not all the time.
Just enough to keep it natural. "How was your day?" "A little better." "I'm tired but okay." These sentences might seem basic, but they carry meaning, and meaning is what builds fluency. There's also a powerful concept in language learning called comprehensible input. It means you learn best when the language is slightly above your current level, but still understandable.
Not too easy.
Not too hard.
Just right.
That's exactly what I needed. Not advanced grammar. Not complex vocabulary. Just clear, meaningful language that I could relate to. And over time, I noticed something. My listening improved. My confidence improved. But more importantly, my mindset improved. Because every small success, every sentence understood, every phrase spoken, felt like progress. And progress creates momentum, even in difficult times. Especially in difficult times. One night, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. I was no longer afraid to speak. Not because I was fluent, but because I had practiced speaking through real emotions. And real emotions don't need perfect grammar. They need honesty. So if you're watching this and thinking, "I'll start learning English when my life is more stable," I want to gently challenge that idea. Because life is rarely perfectly stable. There will always be something. Stress, uncertainty, distractions. But that doesn't mean you can't learn. It just means you need to learn differently. Adapt your approach. Lower your expectations. Focus on consistency, not perfection. Because the truth is, you don't need the perfect moment to grow. You just need to grow in the moment you're in. And sometimes, the most powerful learning doesn't happen when everything is going well. It happens when you're struggling, but you keep going anyway. Because that's when learning becomes more than knowledge. It becomes resilience. And in my case, that resilience was slowly changing everything. Cultural gaps and new lessons. Have you ever felt like you understand the words, but still don't fully understand the meaning? That's what living in Detroit taught me, especially during one of the hardest periods of my life. Because language is only one part of communication. Culture is the other half. And when you don't fully understand both, even simple situations can become confusing, frustrating, or quietly painful. Before I lost my job, I didn't think much about cultural differences. I was focused on survival, work, routine, stability. As long as I could do my job and have basic conversations, I thought I was doing fine. But when everything slowed down, I started noticing more. The way people express emotions here. The way they talk about problems. The way they handle stress. And more importantly, the way my wife and I responded differently to the same situation. You see, in some cultures, when something goes wrong, like losing a job, the natural response is to talk about it openly, to share feelings, to discuss solutions together, even if they're not clear yet. But in other cultures, the instinct is different. You stay quiet. You handle it internally. You don't want to burden the other person.
You think silence is respect.
I was somewhere in between.
Part of me wanted to talk.
Part of me wanted to hide. And that internal conflict showed up in my behavior. Sometimes I would open up a little. Sometimes I would shut down completely. And from her perspective, that inconsistency was confusing. One day I seemed okay. The next day, I was distant. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to express what I was feeling in a way that felt natural in this new environment. This is something many people experience when learning English in a real-life setting. You understand the grammar. You know the vocabulary. But you're not always sure how to use it in the right context. Because communication is not just about what you say. It's about how, when, and why you say it. For example, I noticed that in American culture, especially in cities like Detroit, people often express emotions more directly. If they're stressed, they say it. If they're struggling, they talk about it. If they need support, they ask for it. At first, that felt uncomfortable to me, almost too open, too exposed. But over time, I started to understand something important. Direct communication is not weakness. It's clarity, and clarity builds trust. There's actually research in cross-cultural psychology that shows this difference. Some cultures are considered high context, where meaning is often implied and understood without direct words. Others are low context, where meaning is expressed clearly and explicitly. And when people from these different communication styles interact, misunderstandings happen, not because anyone is wrong, but because they're operating with different expectations. That's what we were experiencing. There were moments when she expected me to say exactly how I felt, and I expected her to understand without me saying much. You can probably guess how that went. Not very well. One evening, we had a small but important conversation. She said gently, "Sometimes I don't know what you're thinking." I paused, because in my mind, I thought I was being clear. But in reality, I wasn't. "I don't want to worry you," I said. She shook her head slightly. "I'm already worried," she replied. "Not knowing makes it worse." That sentence stayed with me, because it revealed something I hadn't fully understood. Silence doesn't protect people. It isolates them. And in a relationship, isolation creates distance. That's when I started making a conscious effort to adjust, not who I was, but how I communicated. I began to use more direct language. Still simple, still slow, but clearer. Instead of saying nothing, I would say, "I'm thinking about the future." Instead of hiding stress, I would say, "I feel a little overwhelmed today." Instead of assuming she understood, I would ask, "Do you understand what I mean?" And something interesting happened. Our conversations became smoother, not because they were perfect, but because they were aligned. This is also a powerful lesson for learning English. You don't need to sound like a native speaker to communicate effectively. You just need to be clear. Clarity is more important than complexity. There's also another layer to cultural differences that I started to notice. The concept of independence. In American culture, there's a strong emphasis on being self-reliant. solving your own problems, taking responsibility for your own path. And while that can be empowering, it can also create pressure, especially when you're going through something difficult. I felt that pressure. The pressure to fix everything quickly, to find a new job, to restore stability, to prove that I was still capable. And sometimes that pressure made me withdraw even more, because I felt like I had to handle everything alone. But that's not how relationships work. At least not healthy ones. A strong relationship is not about two independent people living separate lives. It's about two people choosing to face life together, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's uncertain. So if you're watching this and navigating your own journey, whether it's learning English, adjusting to a new culture, or dealing with challenges in your relationship, I want you to consider this. Maybe the problem is not your ability. Maybe it's your approach. Maybe you don't need more vocabulary. Maybe you need more clarity. Maybe you don't need to change who you are. Maybe you need to adjust how you express it. Because understanding a language is one thing. Understanding people is another. And when you start to connect those two, that's when real communication begins. That's when misunderstandings turn into learning. That's when distance turns into connection. And in our case, that's when things slowly started to feel aligned again. Not perfect, but better. And sometimes better is exactly where real growth begins. The turning point night. Have you ever had a night where nothing external really changes, but somehow everything inside you shifts? Not a big event. Not a dramatic moment. Just a quiet realization that you can't keep living the same way anymore. That night came for us in Detroit, on an ordinary evening that didn't look important at all. No storm outside. No argument building up. Just a normal day slowly turning into night. But inside, something had reached its limit. All day, I had been carrying a heavy feeling. Not just stress about finding a new job, but something deeper. A quiet fear that we were slowly drifting again. Not as bad as before, not as silent, but still not fully connected. And here's the strange part about emotional distance. It doesn't always show up clearly. Sometimes everything looks fine on the surface, but underneath there's tension, unspoken thoughts, unresolved feelings. And if you ignore it long enough, it builds. That evening, we sat together after dinner. The room was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Just still. She was looking at her phone. I was staring at nothing in particular. And then, out of nowhere, a thought hit me. If I don't say something now, we might slowly lose this again. It wasn't a loud thought, but it was clear. And clarity, when it comes at the right moment, feels almost impossible to ignore. So I did something that honestly scared me a little. I spoke. Not perfectly. Not confidently. Just honestly. I think we are okay. But also not really okay. She looked up immediately. Not confused. Not defensive. Just attentive. What do you mean? She asked. Now this is the moment where most people stop. Because your brain starts doing that thing again. Don't make it worse. Maybe it's not the right time. What if this turns into an argument? But here's what I had learned by this point. Avoiding the moment doesn't protect the relationship. Facing it does. So, I continued. I feel like we are trying. But maybe we are still holding back. There it was. Not a perfect sentence, but a real one. and something shifted in the air. Because when you say something true, something you've been avoiding, it creates space for honesty. She didn't answer immediately. And for a second, I felt that familiar tension again. But this time, I didn't panic. I waited. And then she said quietly, "Yeah, I feel that too." That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but powerful. Because for the first time in a long time, we were not just talking. We were aligned. There's a psychological concept called emotional congruence. It means that both people in a conversation are expressing their true feelings without hiding or adjusting too much. And when that happens, communication becomes clearer, deeper, and more meaningful. That's what was happening to us.
No filters. No pretending.
Just truth. And here's where things went deeper. She looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. I think we were both trying to be strong, but in a way that made us distant. That sentence hit hard, because it was true. We thought we were protecting each other, by not complaining, by not showing too much fear, by trying to handle it. But in reality, we were creating distance. This is something many people experience. Not just in relationships, but in their personal growth too. They think being strong means not showing struggle, not making mistakes, not asking for help. But real strength? It looks different. It looks like honesty. It looks like vulnerability. It looks like saying, "I don't have everything figured out." And that night, we finally allowed ourselves to be that kind of strong. "I don't know what will happen next," I said. She nodded. "Me neither." Simple, but real. And something interesting happened next. Instead of feeling more anxious, we both felt calmer. Because uncertainty shared is easier to carry than uncertainty alone. There's actually neuroscience behind this. When you share your thoughts and emotions with someone you trust, your brain releases oxytocin, a hormone associated with bonding and safety. At the same time, stress levels decrease. In simple terms, talking reduces stress. Connection creates calm. And that calm gives you the mental space to think more clearly. That's exactly what we needed. Not solutions. Not immediate answers. Just clarity. And connection. At some point, the conversation shifted slightly. She asked, "What do you want to do next?" Now, before, that question would have felt overwhelming. Too big. Too uncertain. But in that moment, it felt manageable. Because I wasn't answering it alone. "I don't know everything," I said. "But I want to try."
Slowly.
She smiled. "That's enough." This is also how progress works in learning English. You don't suddenly become fluent. You don't suddenly understand everything.
You just decide to keep trying.
One sentence at a time. One conversation at a time. And over time, those small efforts create something bigger. Confidence.
Flow.
Connection. That night didn't solve all our problems. I still didn't have a job. The future was still uncertain. But something had changed. We were no longer avoiding the truth. We were facing it. Together. And that changes everything. Because when two people stop pretending and start being real, that's where transformation begins. So if you're watching this and feeling like something in your life is slightly off, maybe your relationship, maybe your motivation, maybe your confidence in English, I wanted to ask yourself something simple. What am I not saying? Because sometimes the thing you're avoiding is exactly the thing that can move you forward. That night, I didn't find all the answers. But I found something more important. The courage to ask the right questions. And sometimes, that's the real turning point. Rebuilding from zero. Have you ever had to start over? Not because you wanted to, but because life quietly erased your previous plan? Starting over sounds inspiring when people talk about it in movies or motivational videos. It sounds bold,
fresh,
full of opportunity. But in real life, starting over often feels like standing in the same place with less certainty than before. That's exactly where I found myself in Detroit. No job, limited savings, a relationship still healing, and a mind that was slowly learning how to think differently but not fully there yet. The strange thing about rebuilding your life is that nothing feels urgent and everything feels urgent at the same time. You know you need to move forward, but you don't know where to start. And when you don't know where to start, your brain does something predictable. It freezes, not because you're weak, but because you're overwhelmed. There's a concept in psychology called analysis paralysis. When you have too many options or too much uncertainty, your brain struggles to choose a direction. So instead of taking action, it delays. It waits. It hopes for clarity. But clarity rarely comes before action. It usually comes after. That's something I had to learn the hard way. In the beginning, I spent a lot of time thinking, what kind of job should I look for? Should I change careers? What if I fail again? All valid questions, but none of them moved me forward. They just kept me in the same place. And here's the irony. Thinking feels productive. But without action, it's just comfortable delay. So I made a decision. Not a big one. Not a life-changing plan. Just a small, clear rule. Do something every day. Even if it's small. Even if it feels insignificant. Because small actions create momentum. And momentum creates direction. The first day, I updated my resume. It wasn't perfect. I didn't rewrite everything. I just made a few changes. The second day, I sent out one job application. Just one.
Not 10.
Not 20.
One.
And that mattered. Because it broke the pattern of inaction. This is something you can apply directly to learning English too. You don't need to study for hours. You don't need a perfect system. You just need to show up. One video. One sentence. One attempt. Because consistency beats intensity. Every time. At the same time, something else was happening at home. We were still talking more. Still connecting. But now, there was a new layer to our conversations. Planning. Not big plans. Just small steps. What will you do tomorrow? I'll send a few applications. That's good.
Simple.
But supportive. And support, real support, is not about solving someone's problems. It's about being present while they solve them. That made a difference. Because rebuilding alone feels heavy. Rebuilding together feels possible. I also started creating a simple routine. Not a strict schedule. Just a loose structure. Morning. Wake up, light exercise, short English listening practice. Midday. Job search applications. Evening. Rest, conversation, reflection. Nothing complicated. But structure gives your brain something it needs. Stability. When your external life feels uncertain, internal structure becomes even more important. It reduces anxiety. It increases focus. And it helps you feel like you're moving, even if progress is slow. There's also a scientific reason why routines work. Your brain loves patterns. When you repeat the same actions regularly, they become automatic. This reduces the mental effort required to start, which means you're more likely to continue. In simple terms, routine removes resistance. And when resistance is low, action becomes easier. That's what I needed. Not motivation, but systems. Because motivation is unpredictable. Systems are reliable. There were still hard days, of course. Days when I didn't feel like doing anything. Days when rejection emails came in. Days when doubt returned. Maybe this won't work. Maybe I'm not good enough. Those thoughts didn't disappear, but they didn't control me anymore. Because I had something stronger. A habit of showing up. And that habit made a difference. Even in my English learning. Instead of trying to learn everything, I focused on repetition. Listening to the same content multiple times. Speaking simple sentences out loud.
Not worrying about mistakes.
Just practicing. And slowly, I noticed something. I was improving. Not dramatically, but steadily. And steady progress builds confidence. Confidence that doesn't come from success, but from consistency. One evening, after a long day, we sat together again. This time, the silence felt different. Not empty,
But calm.
"How was your day?" she asked. I smiled slightly. "Better. I did something." She nodded. "That's enough." That phrase again. That's enough. And it made me realize something important. We often think progress has to be big to matter. But it doesn't. Small progress is still progress. And when you repeat it, it becomes something bigger. That's how rebuilding works. Not in giant leaps, but in small, consistent steps. So if you're watching this and feeling like you have to start over, whether in your career, your relationship, or your English learning journey, I want you to remember this. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to begin. Small, simple,
Honest.
because starting over is not about going back to zero. It's about building again with more awareness than before. And that awareness? That's your advantage. Because this time, you're not just trying. You're learning how to try better. And that changes everything. Stronger than before. Have you ever looked back at a difficult time in your life and realized it didn't just break you, it quietly rebuilt you into someone stronger? Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in small, almost invisible ways. That's what started happening to us in Detroit. Not all at once. Not with a big moment of success, but slowly through repetition, honesty, and a lot of imperfect days. By this point, something had clearly changed. We were still dealing with uncertainty. My job situation wasn't fully stable yet. The future was still open, still unpredictable. But we were different, not because life became easier, but because we became stronger inside it. And strength, real strength, doesn't always look the way you expect. It doesn't always look confident or loud. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like consistency. Sometimes it looks like choosing to show up even when you're tired. That's what we were doing. Every day. Still having those small conversations. Still using simple English. Still asking each other, "How are you feeling today?" And here's the interesting part. Those questions started to feel natural. Not forced. Not awkward. Just part of who we were becoming. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called identity-based habits. It means that when you repeat an action consistently, it stops feeling like something you do and starts becoming part of who you are. You're not just trying to communicate better. You become someone who communicates. You're not just learning English. You become someone who uses English. That shift is powerful. Because once something becomes part of your identity, you don't need motivation to continue. You just do it.
That's what was happening to me.
I wasn't forcing myself to practice English anymore. I was using it naturally in conversations, in thoughts, even sometimes in my inner dialogue. Simple sentences, clear expressions, real emotions, and that made everything easier. Because fluency is not about knowing everything. It's about being comfortable with what you know. At the same time, our relationship was becoming more stable again, but in a different way than before. Before, our stability came from routine, from comfort, from things going normally. Now, our stability came from something deeper, understanding. We understood each other better. Not perfectly, but more honestly. We knew how to recognize when the other person was stressed. We knew when to talk and when to just sit quietly together. We knew that silence didn't always mean distance anymore. Sometimes it meant peace. That's a big difference. Because earlier, silence felt heavy. Now it felt safe. That shift didn't happen overnight. It came from everything we had been through. The job loss, the tension, the conversations, the small efforts. All of it added up. There's also something important happening in the brain during this kind of growth. It's called neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to change and adapt based on experience. When you go through challenges and actively work through them, your brain forms new connections, stronger connections, more resilient patterns. In simple terms, you don't just survive difficulty. You become better at handling it. That's why things that once felt overwhelming now felt manageable. Not easy, but manageable. One evening, we were sitting together again, reflecting on the past few months. "Do you feel different?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," I said. "I think I'm not as afraid as before." She nodded. "I see that." And that was true. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it lost its control. Because confidence is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to move forward, even when fear is still there. That's something many people misunderstand. They think they need to feel ready before they act. But readiness doesn't come first. Action does. And through action, readiness grows. This applies to everything. Your career, your relationships, your English learning journey. You don't wait until you feel confident to speak. You speak, and then confidence builds. You don't wait until everything is perfect to move forward. You move forward and then things improve. That's what we had learned. Not from a book, not from a course, but from real experience. From living through something difficult and choosing not to give up. There were still moments of doubt, of course. That doesn't disappear completely. But now, when those moments came, we handled them differently. Instead of withdrawing, we talked. Instead of avoiding, we faced them. Together. And that made all the difference. One simple sentence started to define this new version of us. We'll handle it. Not you. Not me.
We.
That word again. Small, but powerful. because it represents something bigger than language. It represents connection,
partnership, commitment.
and commitment is not tested when things are easy. It's tested when things are uncertain. That's what this journey had been about. Not just finding a new job, not just improving my English, but discovering what we were really made of as individuals and as a couple. So if you're watching this and wondering whether difficult times can actually strengthen something, whether it's your relationship, your mindset, or your ability to learn and grow, the answer is this: yes. But only if you stay engaged. Only if you keep trying. Only if you choose connection over avoidance. Because difficulty doesn't automatically make you stronger. Your response to it does. And in our case, we didn't just survive that difficult period. We became something better because of it. Not perfect, but real. And sometimes, real is stronger than anything else. A new beginning, not an ending. What if the hardest chapter of your life wasn't the end of your story, but the beginning of the version of you that finally understands how to live, love, and keep going? That question stayed with me long after everything started to stabilize in Detroit. Because by now, on the surface, things looked better. I had found a new job. Not perfect, not my dream role, but stable. Enough to give us breathing room again. Enough to remove that constant pressure that had been sitting quietly in the background for months. Our relationship felt calmer too. More open. More honest. We were talking regularly, not just about problems, but about daily life, small thoughts, even simple jokes again. From the outside, it might have looked like we had recovered. Like the difficult phase was over. But here's the truth that most people don't talk about. Just because things get better doesn't mean the journey is finished. Because growth doesn't end when the problem is solved. It continues in how you live afterward. That's what this phase became for me. Not a return to the old life, but the beginning of a new one. And the difference between those two things is important. Going back means repeating old patterns. Starting new means building different ones. That's what I wanted. Not the old version of life where everything looked fine, but where we slowly disconnected without noticing. Not the old mindset where I avoided problems until they became too big to ignore. Not the old habits where I waited for motivation instead of creating structure.
No.
This time, I wanted something more intentional, more aware, more real. And that started with something simple. Reflection. Looking back, not to regret, but to understand what worked, what didn't, what almost broke us, and what helped us rebuild. When you take the time to reflect like this, something powerful happens. You turn experience into insight, and insight becomes guidance for the future. For me, one of the biggest realizations was this. Communication is not something you fix once. It's something you practice continuously. Just like learning English. You don't reach a point where you say, "Okay, I'm done learning." You keep using it. Keep improving. Keep adjusting. The same is true in relationships. You keep talking. Keep listening. Keep being honest, even when it feels uncomfortable. Because comfort doesn't create growth. Awareness does. Another realization was about effort. Before, I thought effort had to feel big to matter. Big changes. Big decisions. Big results. But now I understood something different. Small, consistent effort is what actually builds lasting change. The quiet conversations, the daily routines, The simple habit of asking, "How are you today?" Those small things create strong foundations. And strong foundations make everything else more stable. This also changed how I approached my work and my learning. At my new job, I didn't try to prove everything immediately. I focused on learning, observing, improving step by step. And with English, I kept the same approach that had been working. Simple practice, regular exposure, speaking without fear of mistakes. Not perfect, but consistent. And consistency over time creates confidence. Real confidence. Not the kind that comes from feeling good one day and disappearing the next, but the kind that stays because it's built on action. There's also something else that changed inside me. My relationship with uncertainty. Before, uncertainty felt like a threat. Something to avoid. Something that created anxiety. Now, it felt different. Not comfortable, but acceptable. Because I had learned that uncertainty doesn't mean failure. It means possibility. And possibility is where growth happens. One evening, we went for a walk. Nothing special. Just a quiet street, cool air, the kind of moment that feels simple but meaningful. "Do you think we're different now?" she asked. I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I think we understand more." She nodded. "Me too."
And that was enough.
Not a long conversation. Not a deep analysis. Just a shared understanding that we had changed. And that the change was real. That's when I realized something important. The goal was never to become perfect. The goal was to become aware. Because awareness allows you to adjust, to improve, to stay connected. Without it, you repeat the same patterns. With it, you create new ones. So if you've been following this story from the beginning, if you've seen the struggle, the silence, the tension, the slow rebuilding, I want to leave you with something simple. Not a big lesson. Not a complicated idea. Just a question. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for the perfect moment to change something? If you started small, spoke honestly, tried consistently, what could be different? Because the truth is, you don't need a dramatic turning point to begin again. You just need a moment of decision. A quiet choice to do things differently. And that choice can happen anytime. Even now. This story didn't end with success. It didn't end with everything being perfect. It ended with something more realistic. A new beginning. One where mistakes still happen. Where challenges still come. But where we now have the tools to face them. Together. And that's enough. Because sometimes, the strongest version of your life isn't the one where nothing goes wrong. It's the one where you know how to keep going when it does. So, wherever you are right now, whether you're struggling, rebuilding, or just starting, remember this. You're not behind. You're not stuck. You're just in the middle of your own story. And the next chapter? It's still yours to write. If this story connected with you, stay with the channel because the next one might be exactly what you need to hear next. What if the moment you almost gave up was actually the moment everything was about to change?
Not loudly.
Not instantly, but quietly through the choices you make when no one is watching. This story in Detroit was never just about losing a job or fixing a relationship. It was about something deeper, learning how to stay, how to speak, how to rebuild when walking away feels easier. And maybe that's where you are right now. Tired, unsure, thinking about quitting something that once mattered to you. But here's the truth most people never say. The people who grow the most aren't the ones who never struggle. They're the ones who decide quietly, imperfectly, to keep going anyway. So before you leave this video, ask yourself one simple question. What is one thing you won't give up on today?
Hold on to that.
Because sometimes that one small decision becomes the turning point of your entire life. If this story felt real to you, if it sounded like something you've been going through, then don't stop here. Subscribe now for more real-life English stories, slow listening practice, and powerful life lessons designed to help you think in English. Speak naturally and stay motivated every single day. Like this video to support more meaningful content. Comment below. I will keep going, and take your first step right now. Because the next story might not just change your English. It might change how you see your life. Stay with the channel. Your next breakthrough is closer than you think.